The Bee Gees were one of the most influential pop groups of the 60s and 70s and even influenced much of the disco craze of the 80s. Whether you were alive when the Bee Gees started or born years later, you probably have been caught trying to strut while Stayin' Alive was playing. Sadly, not all the members of the Bee Gees are with us anymore, with Barry Gibb being the only surviving member. Let's look back on how each of the Bee Gees died and reflect on their incredible lives and careers. The Bee Gees' origins. Hugh and Barbara Gibb gave birth to brothers Barry, Maurice, and Robin in Douglas, the capital of the Isle of Man. Barry was born in 1946, while twins Maurice and Robin were born in 1949. They moved to Manchester, their father's hometown, in 1955. Their sister Leslie and youngest brother Andy were born in England. In 1958, the family emigrated to Australia, living in Redcliffe, Queensland. Here, the brothers began to perform to raise pocket money. They were eventually hired by Bill Good to perform their songs at the Redcliffe Speedway racetrack. The crowd would throw money at the Gibb brothers as they entertained them. They were later introduced to the radio host Bill Gates, who gave them the moniker the Bee Gees, which came from Bill Good's surname and the brothers' surname. By the 1960s, the brothers began recording music professionally. The group's name was spelled out in the unique spelling we know now. As their brother Andy grew up, he joined the group as a singer. The brothers could sing beautifully, and Maurice could also play a multitude of instruments. They soon became popular with hits like Wine and Women and Spicks and Specks, but their big break came in the late 60s when they returned to England and began creating a unique sound. Before we tell you more about how each of the Bee Gees died, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First for more. Robin Gibb. Robin Gibb was born December 22, 1949. He had a beautiful vibrato voice, which he realized he could capitalize on from a young age. While still living on the Isle of Man, he once told a neighbor he would form a band one day and become rich from his music. Robin was the lead singer of the Bee Gees and wrote many of the songs. He also wrote songs for other groups. Along with Barry and Maurice, he wrote Only One Woman for the Marbles. He also briefly focused on a solo career in 1969 and 70. During this time, the Bee Gees faced setbacks as a group, but their comeback came in the 70s, especially with the soundtrack of Saturday Night Fever. With this album, he provided lead vocals for Stayin' Alive and How Deep Is Your Love, but he also co-wrote all the original songs with his brothers. He began to collaborate more often with other artists in the 80s. He co-wrote and co-produced Jimmy Ruffin's album Sunrise, released in 1980. He and Barry wrote much of Barbra Streisand's album Guilty, also released that year. In the 2000s, he released a solo album called Magnet. He sang the vocals for the theme song for the British comedy talk show The Dame Edna Treatment. One of the last projects he worked on was a tribute to the victims of the Titanic. It was a musical he wrote along with his song Robin John. Sadly, he couldn't attend the premiere due to health problems. He was suffering from pneumonia and eventually ended up in a coma. He died of kidney failure on May 20th, 2012 at 62. Maurice Gibb. Maurice Gibb was born December 22, 1949, around 30 minutes after his twin brother Robin. Maurice was a talented musician and songwriter. He played the guitar, bass, keyboard, and percussion for the Bee Gees. On their debut album, he served as the instrumentalist for Claustrophobia, one of their earliest hits. In the 70s, he also began releasing solo work, while simultaneously creating some of the Bee Gees' biggest hits. He released a popular song called Railroad. He also recorded an album called The Loner, which still hasn't been released to date. In the 80s, he recorded the song Miami, a Musical Score, which was the theme for a promotional film to promote tourism in Miami. He also composed the song Supernaturals, which was the theme song for the film. He had a reputation for being one of the nicest and friendliest people in the entertainment industry. His brother Robin often described him as being outgoing and gregarious. He enjoyed hanging out with A-list stars, including Sir Michael Caine, David Bowie, and the Beatles. He was also briefly married to singer Lulu. He was heavily influenced by rock and country musicians, ranging from the Beatles to the Everly Brothers. Maurice Gibb lived in Miami with his brothers during the latter part of their careers. He died on January 12, 2003, at age 53. He had suffered a cardiac arrest, which resulted from a twisted intestine. Andy Gibb. While he wasn't officially part of the Bee Gees, the youngest brother, Andy, was also a talented singer and collaborated with his brothers on some of their songs. He also performed live with them before his untimely death. Andy began his career singing in Australia. His first solo record was Words and Music. This was a big hit, and he soon emigrated to the U.S. to continue his career. His first album, Flowing Rivers, was released in 1977. This became a huge hit, and he became one of the most popular solo artists in the USA, the UK, and Australia. But it was during this time he also got addicted to drugs. His drug habit had become severe by the time he was working on his second album. He'd miss performances and studio sessions. He also experienced financial difficulties. He luckily managed to kick his drug habit by attending rehab, but this wasn't enough to get him back to pursuing his musical career. He sadly died March 10, 1988, 5 days after his 30th birthday due to heart inflammation. While his career was short-lived, one must appreciate the incredible talent he had. His elder brothers would often talk about Andy's brilliance, and they remembered him fondly while discussing his life and career in interviews. Hugh and Barbara Gibb. Barbara Pass had performed as a dance band vocalist. She met drummer and bandleader Hugh Gibb in the early 40s. They got married in 1944. Hugh led an orchestra, but often struggled to find gigs. He also worked as a bread delivery man as his day job. This was a crucial service in the war and post-war years that brought joy to many families. He would primarily perform in the north of England, Scotland, and the Isle of Man. His sister suggested they emigrate to Australia to find better opportunities. While Hugh didn't directly instruct his sons to pursue musical careers, he undoubtedly was an influence on them. Barbara's own musical background was also an influence on her sons. She encouraged them to sing and pursue music. She also helped them get their start with performing and meeting with record executives. Barbara also managed the Bee Gees during the early stage of their career. She eventually emigrated to Miami, where her sons also lived. She died in 2016 at age 95. Barry Gibb. Barry is the surviving member of the Bee Gees. He continues to appear in interviews and documentaries to discuss his career and the Bee Gees. He misses his brothers and has said he'd trade all their hits just to bring them back. The Bee Gees were a remarkable music group. We've sadly lost most of the members, but we're lucky they've left behind an incredible body of work. Gene Clark. Gene Clark was one of the founding members of the Byrds and one of the lead singers and songwriters. He was born as Harold Eugene Clark on November 17, 1944 in Tipton, Missouri. He grew up in Kansas City and learned how to play guitar and harmonica at a young age. He was introduced to music by his father, and it wasn't long until he decided to pursue music as a career. He helped form the Byrds in 1964. Gene Clark was instrumental in creating some of their most famous songs, including I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better, Set You Free This Time, You Won't Have to Cry, and 8 Miles High, among many others. He was lauded for his songwriting skills and is often credited as being a major factor behind the band's success. Unfortunately, this didn't always translate well with his fellow bandmates. At times, they resented him for earning extra money for his songwriting. He also hated touring at times as he disliked traveling, especially because he didn't like to fly. After a brief solo career, he returned to perform with the Byrds. He's perhaps one of the more underrated singer-songwriters of his generation and had a huge influence on rock music. In his later years, he began having troubles with his health, mostly due to substance abuse. He was diagnosed with throat cancer in early 1991 and died in May of that year due to a bleeding ulcer. This was a result of his alcoholism. He was 46 years old and died in Sherman Oaks, California. He's buried in his native town of Tipton, Missouri. Before we tell you more about the Byrds who have sadly died, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First for more. Mike Clark. Mike Clark was born June 3, 1946 in New York City. When he was 19, he was performing as a jazz drummer for a variety of bands and touring the country. He soon came across David Crosby while hitchhiking around California. Upon meeting Crosby, he eventually met Roger McGuinn, Chris Hillman, and Gene Clark, with whom he founded the Byrds. He played drums for the band until 1968. In 1985, he got into legal trouble with the remaining members of the band as he began performing under the band's name, despite having left it almost 20 years earlier. While he wasn't involved much in songwriting, he's credited with helping compose some of the band's most popular songs. These included Captain Soul, Artificial Energy, among others. He had a keen interest in country and western music and also performed with the Flying Burrito Brothers. He also performed with Firefall and Jerry Jeff Walker, but his work with the Byrds is what he's best known for. During his later years, Mike and his wife Lee began writing songs together. He also took up oil painting as a hobby. He lived in Treasure Island, Florida during his final years. He passed away in 1993 at age 47 due to liver failure, a result of heavy drinking. Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly was born March 25, 1943 in LA. He began studying the drums as a teen and played in his school's band. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 3 years and lived for a year in Japan. When he returned to the U.S., he decided to pursue a career as a drummer.
Throughout the 60s, he played drums with a variety of different bands, focusing mainly on folk rock. He was the drummer of the band The Rising Suns. When they released music and were signed to a record label, they didn't manage to succeed as a band and soon broke up. Much of their music remained unreleased until the 90s. In the late 60s, while working at a men's clothing store, he was contacted by his cousin Chris Hillman, who was playing bass for the band The Byrds. He played drums for the band, but sadly didn't last long with them. He was soon replaced by Clarence White and then went his own way. He later joined the band Fever Tree for their album For Sale. He played the drums for the band Gas, Food and Lodging. In the later years of his career, he served as a session drummer for a variety of artists including Phil Ochs, John Fahey, and Michael Cohen. He died of natural causes on April 6, 2002 at age 59. Graham Parsons. Ingram Cecil Connor III, known professionally as Graham Parsons, was born November 5, 1946 in Winter Haven, Florida. He became interested in folk rock music during his teens and began playing the guitar, piano, and also singing and writing songs. By 1968, he met the Byrds members and soon became a member himself. He first served as a jazz pianist for the band and then switched over to playing the guitar and singing. While he contributed to a lot of the band's songs, he was never considered a full member of the Byrds. As a result, his stint with them was short-lived and he soon found work elsewhere. He and Chris Hillman formed the Flying Burrito Brothers in 1969 and he performed with them for about a year. He then pursued a solo career. His death came too quickly and was shocking for the music industry. He was wandering throughout Joshua Tree National Park, a place he was fascinated with. Sadly, during this time, he was doing a lot of drugs. He was found dead in his room at the inn at Joshua Tree National Park. He had overdosed on morphine. He spent his last few days consuming an excess of barbiturates and alcohol. Graham Parsons was only 26 when he died. Clarence White. Clarence Joseph LeBlanc was born June 7, 1944 in Lewiston, Maine. He remains best known for his performances as a guitarist and singer for the bluegrass band the Kentucky Colonels, as well as the Byrds. He was also a notable session musician. In July of 1968, the Byrds singer and guitarist Graham Parsons left the band. Clarence stepped in to replace him. He became a full member of the band and was instrumental in helping them appeal to country music fans. Clarence later suggested Kevin Kelly should be replaced with his friend Gene Parsons. Clarence and Gene later became known as the inventors of the B-bender accessory. This accessory helps the guitar player bend the B string to imitate the tone of a pedal steel guitar. Clarence performed live gigs with the Byrds and was involved in the production of some of their most successful albums. He sadly died July 15, 1973, after being hit by a drunk driver while he was loading materials into his car. He was only 29. Skip Batton. Clyde Skip Batton was born February 18, 1934, in Gallipolis, Ohio. He's remembered as a versatile and prolific singer-songwriter, bassist, and live performer for a variety of bands, including the Flying Burrito Brothers, the New Riders of the Purple Sage, and the Byrds. In the early 60s, he worked as an actor and landed a few bit parts in independent films and TV shows. By the mid-60s, he formed a folk rock group, Evergreen Blue Shoes, and released an album with them, but the band soon broke up. He was the bassist for the Byrds from 1970 to 73, and this was his most successful period as a musician. He recorded 3 albums with the band and toured with them as well. He continued to perform as a session musician as well as with other bands in the early 90s. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in the 90s and had to give up his career as a result. He died in 2003 due to complications from the disease. He was 69.
Denny Doherty. Denny Doherty led a life that was both musically rich and personally complex. Born November 29, 1940 in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Doherty's passion for music manifested early. He began his musical journey with the Halifax-based band The Hepsters before moving on to the Colonials, which later became the Halifax 3. But it was in the 1960s that his career took a significant turn. After the delusion of the Halifax 3, Doherty joined the New Journeymen, a folk trio that included John Phillips and Michelle Phillips. This collaboration was the catalyst for the formation of the Mamas and the Papas. Adding Cass Elliot to the lineup, the group quickly rose to fame with their harmonious sound and memorable hits. But beyond the music, the dynamics within the group were often tumultuous. Romantic entanglements, personal tensions, and substance abuse issues led to the group's eventual disbandment in 1968. Doherty's relationship with Mama Cass in particular was a subject of much speculation and was known to have its ups and downs. Post the Mamas and the Papas, Doherty pursued a solo career, releasing a few albums, though none matched the success he experienced with the group. He also ventured into acting and even hosted a variety show in Canada. In the 90s, he co-wrote and starred in a theater production called Dream a Little Dream, which recounted the story of the Mamas and the Papas. Denny Doherty passed away January 19, 2007. Despite the personal challenges and often volatile dynamics of the group, his contribution to the music world is undeniable. Cass Elliot. Cass Elliot, commonly known as Mama Cass, was one of the most distinctive voices of the 60s, both as a member of the Mamas and the Papas and as a solo artist. Born Ellen Naomi Cohen on September 19, 1941 in Baltimore, Cass grew up in a family deeply rooted in culture and music. Her father was a small business owner and her mother a trained singer. The environment instilled in her a love for music early on. They moved to Alexandria, Virginia during her teenage years. She attended George Washington High School, where she was actively involved in music and drama. It was during these formative years that she began to seriously consider a career in entertainment. Her first foray into music began in the early 60s. She formed a folk trio with Tim Rose and John Brown called the Triumvirate. But it was when they replaced Brown with James Hendricks that they renamed themselves the Big Three. While they enjoyed moderate success and made TV appearances, they're best remembered for their rendition of Young Girl's Lament. After the group disbanded, Cass briefly joined a group called the Mugwumps, which had members who later formed parts of the famed groups The Lovin' Spoonful and the Mamas and the Papas. Her true breakthrough came when she joined forces with John Phillips, Michelle Phillips, and Denny Doherty to form the Mamas and the Papas. Cass's powerful contralto voice became one of the defining elements of the group's sound. Her time with this iconic folk pop group in the 60s solidified her place in music history. Their hits like California Dreamin', Monday Monday, and Dedicated to the One I Love are classics, with Cass's voice being central. After they disbanded, she embarked on a solo career. Her rendition of Dream a Little Dream of Me became an instant hit, peaking at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. Over the next few years, she released multiple albums and singles, some of which, like Make Your Own Kind of Music, became staples of her repertoire. She also guest hosted The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson and even had her own specials showcasing her versatile talent. Cass Elliot died July 29, 1974 in London at age 32. She was on a sold-out solo tour in England and had just completed a successful 2-week run at the London Palladium. The initial speculation and a widely spread rumor claimed she choked to death on a sandwich, a falsehood perpetuated by the media. However, the official cause of death, as determined by the coroner, was heart failure. The post-mortem found that she had not choked on food, and her heart showed signs of damage consistent with myocardial infarction. Despite this clarification, the sandwich myth persisted in popular culture for years, often overshadowing her significant musical achievements. John Phillips. John Phillips, best known as the chief songwriter and one of the lead singers of the Mamas and the Papas, led a life that was artistically rich but fraught with personal challenges. His legacy is cemented in the annals of rock history, but his personal journey was riddled with highs and lows. Born August 30th, 1935 in Parris Island, South Carolina, John Edmund Andrew Phillips showed an inclination towards music early on. He was initially part of a few minor groups, but eventually formed the Journeymen, a folk trio in the early 60s. While the group achieved modest success, it was the formation of the Mamas and the Papas that marked a turning point in his career. John was often considered the driving force behind the group, providing much of their creative direction. After the group disbanded, he embarked on various projects. He released his solo album, John Phillips, John the Wolf King of L.A. in 1970, which, though not a commercial success, has since gained a cult following. In the late 70s, he also collaborated with Rolling Stones member Keith Richards on the soundtrack for the film The Man Who Fell to Earth. His life was marred by substance abuse issues. His struggles with drugs and alcohol were well documented and affected both his personal relationships and his professional trajectory. His relationship with his children, especially Mackenzie Phillips, was complex and at times controversial, with Mackenzie later revealing allegations of a troubled and inappropriate relationship with her father. John Phillips passed away March 18, 2001 from heart failure. Michelle Phillips.
Michelle Phillips, born Holly Michelle Gilliam on June 4, 1944 in Long Beach, California, had a multifaceted career spanning several decades. Her musical journey began in earnest when she co-founded the Mamas and the Papas with her then-husband John. With John, Denny, and Cass in the mid-60s. With her clear, melodic voice, she contributed to the group's harmonious sound. She also co-wrote some of the band's songs with John Phillips. After the dissolution of the band, she transitioned into acting. She appeared in a variety of films and television shows over the years. Some of her notable roles include appearances in films like Dillinger, where she earned a Golden Globe nomination, Valentino, and The California Kid. On the television front, Michelle had roles in popular series like Knots Landing and Beverly Hills 90210. Her personal life was as eventful as her career. She was married to John Phillips from 1962 to 70. Their union produced a daughter, China Phillips, who later became a member of the musical group Wilson Phillips. Michelle had subsequent marriages to actor Dennis Hopper, a brief 8-day marriage in 1970, radio executive Robert Birch, and plastic surgeon Stephen Zacks. Throughout the ups and downs of her career and personal life, Michelle Phillips has remained a resilient figure in the entertainment industry. Paul Kantner. As a founding member of the band, guitarist and singer Paul Kantner helped fine-tune Jefferson Airplane's trailblazing sound. After the band was regrouped into Jefferson Starship, he continued his role as a member of this new group. Kantner was born March 17, 1941. Jefferson Airplane was formed in 1965 after Paul met bandmate Marty Balin. He ended up eventually becoming the leader of the band and was instrumental in leading it through its immensely successful period during the late 60s. In 1970, while still a member of Jefferson Airplane, Kantner and a handful of other Bay Area musicians recorded an album called Blows Against the Empire, which was the first time the name Jefferson Starship was used. Kantner continued to perform and record with Jefferson Starship until 1984, when band members went their own ways. He later reformed Starship in 1992 and performed with the group until his death. Kantner passed away January 28, 2016, at age 74. Several days before his death, he suffered a heart attack, which led to him experiencing multiple organ failure and septic shock. The combination of these three things ultimately brought about his death. By sheer coincidence, he died the very same day as one of Jefferson Airplane's lesser-known co-founders, Signe Tolley Anderson. Kantner was the longest continuous band member of Jefferson Airplane and Starship. He spent 19 years with the initial run of Airplane and Starship and another 24 with the Jefferson Starship Revival Band. Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead stated shortly after his death that Kantner was the backbone of Jefferson Airplane, and he deserved just as much credit as Grace Slick. Signe Tolley Anderson. Signe, the original singer of Jefferson Airplane, passed away on the same day as Paul Kantner. She was born on September 15, 1941, in Seattle. Before co-founding the band, Anderson sang in a band with 3 male musicians whom she had met in high school. That group, which was known as 3 Guys and a Gal, ended up performing at a campaign function for John F. Kennedy in 1959. After marrying one of the merry pranksters, Jerry Anderson, Anderson helped form Jefferson Airplane with Marty Balin and Paul Kantner, and ended up being the primary vocalist on the first album, Jefferson Airplane Takes Off, in 1966. Anderson was distrustful of their first manager, Matthew Katz, and flat out refused to sign a contract with him unless it provided her with an escape clause that would free her from him if she chose to leave the band. In July of 1966, after realizing that bringing her then newborn child and husband on the road wasn't really feasible, she informed her bandmates she was leaving the band. They managed to convince her to stay with the group until October so they could find a suitable replacement. That's when they signed on Grace Slick after Sherry Snow of the folk rock group Blackburn and Snow declined their offer. After leaving the band, Anderson moved to Oregon, where she continued to sing for 9 years with the group Carl Smith and the Natural Gas Company. After being diagnosed with cancer in the mid-70s, she managed to make a full recovery. In the 90s, Anderson battled several more health issues. Notably, she broke her neck and had bypass surgery. At age 74, Anderson died from complications of COPD in her home in Beaverton, Oregon. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like, and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already, and stick around for more about Jefferson Airplane and Starship. Marty Balin. Born Martin Jarrell Buchwald in Cincinnati, Ohio, On January 30th, 1942, he was one of the co-founders and lead singers and songwriters of Jefferson Airplane and Jefferson Starship. As a child, Buchwald was diagnosed with autism. After his family moved to the Bay Area, he changed his name to Marty Balin in 1962. After leading a folk quartet called the Town Criers, Balin co-founded Jefferson Airplane in 1965. He served as a co-vocalist and lead songwriter from 1966 to 71 when he left the band following their 1970 tour. He then broke off all communication with the rest of his bandmates. In 1993, he revealed that the reason for this primarily was because of feelings like he and the rest of the band members were moving in different directions. He was into things like yoga, health food, and natural living, while the band was doing a lot of drugs and partying heavily. He hated cocaine and felt it adversely affected the music they were making and performing, so he had few regrets when he left. Balin later joined Kantner's Jefferson Starship in 1975 after penning the power ballad Caroline for the group's 1974 Dragonfly. After 3 years of touring with the group, he abruptly left in 1978 after Grace Slick's departure. Balin remained active in the music industry for the remainder of his life, frequently collaborating with some of his old bandmates on their various projects. He passed away at his home in Tampa on September 27, 2018, at age 76. Skip Spence. Born on April 18, 1946, Spence began his musical career as a guitarist with the Quicksilver Messenger Service before joining Jefferson Airplane as the band's first drummer in 1965. After leaving in '66, he co-founded the band Moby Grape. As that band's guitarist, he performed until 1969 before putting out one solo album, Or. After that, he withdrew from the music industry as he fell into drug addiction and mental illness. Spence died just 2 days before his 53rd birthday on April 16, 1999. Spencer Dryden. Best known for being the drummer for Jefferson Airplane and later the New Riders of the Purple Sage, Dryden was born on April 7, 1938 in New York. After Skip Spence left Jefferson Airplane in 1966, Dryden was recruited to replace him. Alongside bassist Jack Cassidy, Dryden helped create a phenomenal rhythm section for the group. Dryden's affinity for free-form improv jamming can be heard in Jefferson Airplane tracks like Bear Melt and Thing. Dryden quit Jefferson Airplane in 1970 after the band's infamous violent experiences at the Altamont Festival, in which Marty Balin was knocked out by a member of the Hells Angels, and an audience member named Meredith Hunter was stabbed to death. When he left, he was quoted as saying the vibes were no longer what they used to be. From 1970 to 77, Dryden played drums with the New Riders of the Purple Sage. He later played with Bay Area supergroup The Dinosaurs before retiring in 1995. He passed away from colon cancer on January 11, 2005. Joey Covington. Born June 27, 1945, Covington's musical career began when he was 10. After playing with a variety of different bands that got a chance to open for acts like the Rolling Stones, the Shangri-Las, and Lou Christie, to name a few, Covington was called in to replace Spencer Dryden for Jefferson Airplane's 1969 album Volunteers. After leaving the group in 1972 to pursue a solo career, he briefly reunited with Starship to record their 1976 single With Your Love. He later toured as a member of the San Francisco All-Stars in the 80s and 90s. Covington died in a car accident in Palm Springs, California on June 4, 2013, when his vehicle slammed into a retaining wall at high speeds. He was 67. Papa John Creech. Skilled in many different genres, Creech was a violinist best known for his years with Jefferson Airplane. He was born in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania on May 28, 1917. After forming a group called the Chocolate Music Bars in 1930, Creech relocated to LA in the 40s and began playing at cocktail lounges throughout California for the next 2 decades. In 1970, Joey Covington introduced Creech to the members of Jefferson Airplane. Nicknamed Papa by the comparatively younger members, Creech performed with the band until its disbandment in 1972. He also played with Hot Tuna. Creech died of natural causes at age 76 on February 22, 1994. Of Jefferson Airplane and Jefferson Starship, the most notable members still alive are lead guitarist Jorma Kaukonen, bassist Jack Cassidy, and lead vocalist Grace Slick, although several other musicians who played with these two bands over the years are still around as well. The accident that cost him his eye.
On November 19, 1954, Sammy Davis Jr. was nearly killed in a horrific automobile accident in San Bernardino, California. At the time of the crash, he was making his way back from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. A year prior, Sammy had struck up a friendship with Jewish entertainer Eddie Cantor, who had gifted him a mezuzah. Instead of hanging it by his door, as is the tradition, Davis wore it around his neck like a necklace for good luck. The only occasion he forgot to wear it was the night of his accident. The wreck occurred at a junction point along U.S. Route 66 when a driver, who missed their exit, backed up her vehicle in Davis's lane. Sammy was unable to slow down quickly enough to avoid hitting the car and subsequently lost his left eye when his face hit the bullet-shaped horn button of his Cadillac. Sammy's close friend, fellow actor Jeff Chandler, was quoted as saying he would gladly give Davis one of his own eyes if he could keep him from going blind. Fortunately, Davis recovered from his injuries, despite the fact there was no saving his eye. For 6 months after the accident, he had to wear an eye patch. He's seen wearing it on the cover of his debut album. He also was seen wearing it when he appeared on the CBS game show What's My Line later that year. He was later fitted with a glass eye, which he wore for the remainder of his life. While in the hospital, Eddie Cantor described to Sammy the striking similarities between the Jewish people's historical struggles to that of black cultures. Davis had been born into a Christian household. His mother was Catholic and his father was a Baptist. He began studying Judaism and Jewish history several years after the accident and converted to the faith in 1961. The accident marked a pivotal turning point in not just his spiritual worldview, but also his career. Shortly after losing his eye and narrowly avoiding death, Davis was transformed from a well-known entertainer to a national celebrity. Before we tell you more, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. The Rat Pack was originally called the Klan, but Sammy cried foul. In 1959, Sammy became a member of the notorious Rat Pack, which was led by his close friend and fellow entertainer Frank Sinatra. The ragtag crew of entertainers included the likes of Joey Bishop, Dean Martin, and John F. Kennedy's brother-in-law, Peter Lawford. Sinatra initially referred to the gathering as the Klan, but Davis was staunchly opposed to this title for obvious and understandable reasons. It was too reminiscent to the racist organization, the Ku Klux Klan. Sinatra then renamed the group the Summit, but that didn't stick for very long either. After a long evening of poker that extended into the early morning hours, the men were left drunken and disheveled. As the story goes, actress Angie Dickinson approached the group and stated they looked like a pack of rats. The nickname quickly caught on, and from then onward they were known as the Rat Pack. This story may be a bit apocryphal, however, as the earlier group that was led by Humphrey Bogart and his wife Lauren Bacall, who also called themselves the Rat Pack, earned that designation after Bacall made a similar remark about them resembling a pack of rats. Sammy's tragic marriages to Kim Novak and Lorraine White. In 1957, Sammy began dating white actress Kim Novak. By most accounts, Davis was deeply in love with her, and she apparently shared those sentiments. It was the first time he loved someone enough to marry them. After the rumor started going around that Davis planned on marrying Novak, racist white people who opposed interracial marriage were incensed. One particularly racist individual who took issue with Sammy marrying Kim was Novak's boss, Harry Cohn. Harry was the head of Columbia Pictures, the studio that Novak was under contract with. He thought Novak's marriage to a black man would hurt the studio's profits. It didn't seem to matter that Davis was incredibly famous, respected, and loved by many. Cohn ended up hiring the mob to threaten Sammy. Reportedly, the mobsters claimed that they would blind him in his remaining good eye and break his legs if he didn't marry a black woman in the next 48 hours. Davis was understandably spooked by these threats and subsequently gave in to his harassers' demands. To protect himself from the violence, Davis married a black dancer named Lorraine White. Everyone around him knew the marriage was a sham, and the only reason he had agreed to go through with it was because of the threats. Sammy agreed to pay White off with a large lump sum under the condition that their marriage would be dissolved within the year. But even though they went through with a traditional wedding, it's known that he drank too much at the reception. It's also said that he attempted to strangle White en route to their wedding suite. Later that evening, he was found holding a gun to his head, threatening to take his life. Sammy and Lorraine's marriage was understandably short-lived, and they were no longer married by 1959. This was clearly one of the low points of his life. He died of throat cancer. In August of 1989, Davis developed a disconcerting tickle in the back of his throat and lost the ability to taste food. His doctors quickly discovered he had a cancerous tumor in his throat. He'd been a heavy smoker for the majority of his adult life. Reportedly, he smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day. When he was informed that laryngectomy surgery provided him with the best chance of survival, he told his doctors he would rather hold on to his voice and face the cancer head-on rather than have part of his throat removed. So instead of immediately going under the knife, he opted to be treated with a combination of radiation therapy and chemo. Later on, however, after his cancer reoccurred, he had to have his larynx removed. He was released from the hospital in March of 1990, but just 2 months later, he died from complications of his throat cancer on May 16, 1990, at age 64. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. 2 days after his death, the bright neon lights of the Vegas Strip went dark for 10 minutes in his honor. His fortune was eclipsed by his debts. In his will, Davis left the majority of his estate to his widow Altovis Davis. It's estimated his estate was worth $4 million, but unfortunately, Davis had owed the IRS more than $5 million, which after penalties and interest ballooned to more than $7 million. Since Altovis had co-signed his tax returns, she became liable for his debt. To cover the massive bill, she was left with no other choice but to auction off his personal possessions and real estate holdings. A few of Davis's friends in the industry, including Steve Allen, Ed Asner, Jane Meadows, Joey Bishop, and Quincy Jones, arranged a fundraising concert at the famous Sands Hotel in Las Vegas to help ease that burden. In 1997, Altovis reached a settlement deal with the IRS. After her death in 2009, their son Manny became the sole executor of Sammy's estates and was made the majority rights holder of his intellectual property.
This story in from Clear Lake, Iowa. 3 of the nation's top rock and roll singing stars, Richie Valens, J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, and Buddy Holly, died today with their pilot in the crash of a chartered plane. Their 4-seat, single-engine plane never made it off the ground. It crashed minutes later.
The Day the Music Died. Those words from Don McLean's classic song, American Pie, refer to the tragic 1959 plane crash that claimed the lives of Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson. The loss of those rising stars was devastating for the music world. Sadly, many other influential bands over the years have faced a similar fate, having to cope with the untimely death of a key member. In this video, we'll be taking a somber look back at 11 beloved bands forced to either break up or drastically change course after losing an integral part of their group. From classic rock pioneers to grunge trailblazers to metal luminaries, these artists made an inexpungible impact but had their time cut short. While their music endures, it's hard not to wonder what might have been had tragedy not struck. Join us as we pay tribute to these beloved bands that broke up because a member died. Led Zeppelin. Formed in London in 1968, Led Zeppelin became one of the most influential and successful rock bands in history. With Robert Plant's powerful vocals, Jimmy Page's groundbreaking guitar work, John Paul Jones' diverse instrumentation, and John Bonham's thunderous drumming, their unique alchemy redefined rock music in the 1970s. Over just 12 years, Zeppelin released 8 studio albums filled with enduring classics like Stairway to Heaven, Kashmir, Whole Lotta Love, and Immigrant Song. Their albums topped the charts globally as the band sold out arenas and stadiums with their epic live shows. Zeppelin reached the pinnacle of rock stardom. Sadly, it all came crashing down on September 25, 1980. After a day of heavy drinking, drummer John Bonham was found unresponsive by bandmate John Paul Jones. Bonham had asphyxiated in his sleep at the age of 32. The loss devastated the band and the music world. Considered by many the greatest rock drummer of all time, Bonham's power, speed, distinctive sound, and innovative rhythms were the engine that propelled Zeppelin. Plant, Page, and Jones concluded they could not continue as Led Zeppelin without their irreplaceable drummer. They issued a statement in December 1980 that, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep respect we have for his family, together with the sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager, have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." It was the end of an era. The surviving members have occasionally reunited for special one-off live performances, with drummers like Phil Collins and Bonham's son Jason filling in. Page and Plant recorded and toured as a duo in the 1990s, but they have resisted a full-fledged Led Zeppelin reunion without Bonham. His death brought a premature end to the band, leaving fans left pondering what heights they may have reached if tragedy had not struck. But Zeppelin's legacy as the quintessential hard rock band has only grown in the decades since. cementing their place in music history. Nirvana.
Energy comes out of the outlets into our amplifiers. And then the energy comes out of us, and it goes into the audience, and they bounce it back, and we just play catch with some vibes. Energy with vibes. Wow.
In just a few short years, Nirvana exploded from the Seattle underground to completely upend the pop music landscape, fronted by Kurt Cobain with Chris Novoselic on bass and Dave Grohl on drums. The trio's seismic shift of the mainstream towards alternative rock changed the industry and culture. Their 1989 debut, Bleach, provided the first rumblings, but it was 1991's Nevermind that triggered a full-blown musical earthquake. Propelled by the massive hit Smells Like Teen Spirit, the album knocked Michael Jackson's Dangerous off the top of the charts. Grunge was suddenly the dominant youth culture force. Cobain was anointed the reluctant voice of a generation. But as Nirvana's fame grew, so did Cobain's struggles with addiction and depression. Still, the band recorded the stellar follow-up In Utero and maintained a grueling touring schedule. However, Cobain's mental health and drug issues worsened. On April 8, 1994, Cobain was found dead at his Seattle home, the victim of a self-inflicted gunshot. He was 27 years old. The tragedy sent mournful shockwaves through the music world. Novoselic and Grohl were utterly devastated by the loss of their friend and bandmate. With Cobain gone, they quickly decided to disband Nirvana. No one could fathom the band continuing without its lead creative force and tortured soul. Grohl briefly considered quitting music altogether. Ultimately, he recorded a batch of solo songs, playing most of the instruments himself. This became the debut album of his new band Foo Fighters, which allowed Grohl to step out as a frontman and develop his own musical identity. Novoselic collaborated with various artists over the years, but largely focused on political and social activism in his home state of Washington. He and Grohl have reunited on rare occasions for Nirvana material, with guest vocalists filling in for Cobain, most notably at the band's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 2014. Nirvana's cultural impact and influence far outstripped their brief time together. Besides turning alternative rock into the mainstream, they paved the way for countless artists to bare their souls and exorcise demons through cathartic, raw music. Cobain became an icon of the 1990s whose life was cut tragically short. His loss brought a sudden end to Nirvana, but their legacy remains immense and undeniable. The Doors.
Sweet substitute.
How's that for a shit-eating grin?
The Doors are one of the most mythologized bands in rock history, thanks in large part to the mystique surrounding their magnetic frontman Jim Morrison. Formed in Los Angeles in 1965, the quartet fused rock, blues, jazz, and psychedelia into an intoxicating brew on classic songs like Light My Fire, Break On Through, To the Other Side, Hello, I Love You, and Riders on the Storm. Morrison's deep baritone voice, poetic lyrics, and shamanistic stage presence, along with the band's atmospheric sound, made them darlings of the late 60s counterculture. But Morrison's rebellious spirit and wild offstage antics made him a magnet for controversy and trouble with the law, while appealing multiple indecent exposure and profanity charges from a notorious 1969 Miami concert. Morrison decamped to Paris in early 1971 for a sabbatical with his girlfriend Pamela Corson. Then, on July 3, 1971, the shocking news came that Morrison had been found dead in the bathtub of his Paris apartment, apparently of heart failure at the age of 27. The circumstances surrounding his passing remain shrouded in mystery and conjecture to this day, adding to the legend. Devastated by the loss of their lead singer and lyricist, the three surviving Doors initially attempted to soldier on. Keyboardist Ray Manzarek and guitarist Robbie Krieger assumed vocal duties on the subsequent albums Other Voices and Full Circle, but the magic was gone. Drummer John Densmore proposed they search for a new frontman, but Manzarek declined. So in 1973, the Doors quietly disbanded, closing the book on the influential band. The band's legacy and Morrison's legend only grew after his death, spurred on by the use of their songs in major films, the best-selling Morrison biography, No One Here Gets Out Alive, and the Val Kilmer starring biopic, The Doors. Manzarek, Krieger, and Densmore occasionally reunited over the years for special live performances, with guest vocalists filling Morrison's big shoes. But the Doors' story essentially ended when Morrison's life did on that fateful night in Paris. Morrison's self-destructive poet-rock god archetype set the mold for countless imitators to follow. While his life was cut short, his impact and influence endures through the music he made in his brief but bright flame of a career. Soundgarden.
The band that we are is the only band we can be with the members that we have, and what we create is something that isn't necessarily going to be exactly like anything else. I think any band can do that if the people rely on themselves for inspiration and rely on each other as influence.
Soundgarden were key members of the Seattle grunge scene that took the music world by storm in the early 90s. Along with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains, they fused heavy metal and punk-influenced alternative rock into a powerful new sound. Fronted by Chris Cornell's incredible vocal range, they scored hits like Black Hole Sun, Spoonman, and Outshined, finding critical and commercial success with albums like Bad Motorfinger and Super Unknown. The band split in 1997 amid internal tensions, with Cornell pursuing solo work and the supergroup Audioslave. But 2010 saw a well-received Soundgarden reunion and the album King Animal. They hit the road and began work on new material, fully back in action. Then tragedy struck in May 2017. Hours after a Detroit show, Cornell was found dead in his hotel room, having taken his own life. Toxicology reports showed prescription drugs in his system. The devastating loss of their leader at age 52 left the band reeling. As guitarist Kim Thayil explained to reporters at the time, Soundgarden could not continue without Cornell's crucial voice and presence. The singular sound he helped create was impossible to replicate. Thayil said the band concluded the best way to honor Cornell was to maintain their legacy, not attempt to replace him. While not ruling out possible one-off tribute performances, Soundgarden essentially ended as an active band with Cornell's death. His irreplaceable talents were far too integral to their identity. The music world lost a powerful, unique voice and performer. Alice in Chains.
I grew up in Bellevue. I was a Bellevue brat. Had all the nice luxuries and toys that a kid ever needed. Changed my hair, my clothes. Turned into a rock guy.
One of the pioneers of the Seattle grunge scene that exploded in the early 90s, Alice in Chains released a string of hugely successful and influential albums like Facelift, Dirt, and Alice in Chains. Their dark, sludgy, yet melodic sound, powered by the vocals of lead singer Lane Staley and guitarist-vocalist Jerry Cantrell, earned them comparisons to metal acts like Metallica, while still appealing to alternative rock fans. But as their star rose, Staley sank deeper into heroin addiction, causing tension within the band. While never officially breaking up, Alice in Chains largely went on hiatus after 1996 as Staley became more reclusive amidst his drug issues. His final performance with the band was a 1996 reunion show recorded for MTV Unplugged. Sadly, after years of battling addiction, Staley was found dead of an overdose in his Seattle apartment in April 2002. The 34-year-old singer's passing devastated his bandmates, family, friends, and fans. Alice in Chains had lost their iconic lead singer and lyricist. The band essentially broke up for a few years after Staley's death as the surviving members mourned and pursued other projects. In 2005, they regrouped for a Tsunami benefit concert with guest singers like Maynard James Keenan and Ann Wilson filling in for Staley. The experience proved cathartic and inspired them to explore carrying on. Eventually, the band connected with William Duvall, who had been a member of Cantrell's solo band. Duvall's versatile vocals were a natural fit. In a sensitive situation, he managed to evoke Staley's spirit while still making the songs his own. With Duvall in place, Alice in Chains made a full return, releasing new albums and touring regularly. The band made it clear that Duvall was not a replacement for Staley and that no one could fill those shoes. Instead, he was a new chapter for Alice in Chains that allowed Cantrell, drummer Sean Kinney, and bassist Mike Inez to continue making music together. They view their work with Duvall as a way to honor Staley and keep his memory alive. By soldiering on after tragedy, Alice in Chains have enjoyed a second wind as a band that many acts who lost key members did not. Cantrell stepped up as the primary songwriter and lead vocalist in the wake of Staley's passing. While they'll never really be the same band without him, Alice in Chains' story now has a poignant yet productive coda. Van Halen. Van Halen, led by guitar icon Eddie Van Halen, are true hard rock titans. By combining Eddie's pyrotechnic fretwork with David Lee Roth's flamboyant showmanship, they brought heavy metal into the pop mainstream in the late 1970s and 80s. Blockbuster albums like their self-titled 1978 debut, 1984, and 5150 spawned enduring hits like Runnin' with the Devil, Jump, Panama, Hot for Teacher, and Why Can't This Be Love? The band weathered lead singer changes over the decades, with Sammy Hagar replacing Roth in 1985 for a successful era before departing himself in the mid-1990s. An infamous brief reunion with Roth in 1996 produced several new songs, but old tensions quickly resurfaced. The volatile Roth came and went multiple times as the band tried out other singers, including a one-album stint by Gary Cherone of Extreme. In 2006, Eddie's son, Wolfgang Van Halen, replaced original bassist Michael Anthony, joining his uncle Alex Van Halen on drums. This lineup, with Roth back on board, would prove to be Van Halen's last. Eddie had long struggled with alcoholism and other health issues. In 2000, he was diagnosed with oral cancer and had part of his tongue removed. Further health scares and substance abuse battles plagued him over the next 2 decades of periodic activity and inactivity with Van Halen. Then, after a long battle that had recently spread to his brain, Eddie succumbed to cancer on October 6, 2020, at age 65. The loss of one of rock's most innovative and influential guitarists reverberated across the music community. Following his passing, countless artists paid tribute and shared stories of his massive impact. Wolfgang confirmed the band died with his father, writing on social media that, "I can't believe I'm having to write this, but my father, Edward Lodewijk Van Halen, has lost his long and arduous battle with cancer this morning. He was the best father I could ever ask for. Every moment I've shared with him on and off stage was a gift." While the Van Halen brothers were the only constants throughout the band's 40-plus-year career, Eddie was undoubtedly its driving creative force. With his singular guitar playing, songwriting, and larger-than-life presence gone, it's impossible to imagine Van Halen continuing in any form. The band's story will forever be synonymous with Eddie's. Pantera. Pantera, hailing from the Texas metal underground, became one of the most influential and successful heavy metal bands of the 1990s. Their distinctive sound was defined by the powerful rhythm section of drummer Vinnie Paul and his brother, bassist Rex Brown, alongside the blistering guitar work of Dimebag Darrell Abbott and the intense vocals of Phil Anselmo. With this lineup, Pantera pushed the boundaries of heavy metal, bringing a new level of intensity and technicality to the genre. Albums like Cowboys from Hell, 1990, Vulgar Display of Power, 1992, and Far Beyond Driven, 1994, not only solidified Pantera's place in metal history, but also helped define the groove metal subgenre. Hit songs like Walk, Cemetery Gates, and I'm Broken remain metal classics and showcase the band's ability to combine raw aggression with memorable hooks. Despite their success, tensions within the band began to mount, largely due to Anselmo's ongoing substance abuse issues and involvement in side projects. These tensions came to a head in 2001, resulting in Pantera going on an indefinite hiatus. Tragedy struck on December 8, 2004, when Dimebag Darrell was brutally murdered on stage during a performance with his new band, Damage Plan, at a club in Columbus, Ohio. A deranged fan named Nathan Gale, a former Marine, stormed the stage and shot Darrell multiple times, killing him along with a fan, a club employee, and a security guard before being shot dead by a police officer. Dimebag Darrell was only 38 years old at the time of his death. The metal community was left reeling by the senseless killing of one of its most beloved and talented guitarists. Known for his incredible skills, as well as his fun-loving and generous personality, Dimebag Darrell was a universally respected figure among fans and fellow musicians alike. Vinnie Paul, who had an incredibly close bond with his brother, was understandably hit hard by the tragedy. He maintained that Pantera could not and would not continue without Dimebag, stating, "It's not right for us to go on without Dime. I don't want to cheapen or tarnish the legacy of his greatness." Anselmo and Brown shared this sentiment, acknowledging that the Abbott brothers were integral to Pantera's sound and identity. In the years following Dimebag's death, Anselmo and Brown eventually reconciled and began performing Pantera songs live with guest guitarists like Zakk Wylde. The absence of the Abbott brothers was keenly felt, and fans naturally hoped for some form of a Pantera reunion. Surprisingly, in 2022, Anselmo and Brown announced a Pantera tribute tour with Zakk Wylde and Anthrax drummer Charlie Benante, filling in for Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul, respectively. While not an official reunion of the original lineup, the tour provided an opportunity for the surviving members to celebrate Pantera's music and legacy. Joy Division.
That was Ian's first suicide note, and the strangest thing in the world, or the two strangest things in the world that I think, are the fact that Debbie let us see the first one, but wouldn't let you see the second one.
Joy Division emerged from the post-punk scene of late 1970s Manchester, England, with a dark, atmospheric sound that would prove hugely influential on alternative and indie rock in the decades to come. Formed in 1976 by singer Ian Curtis, guitarist Bernard Sumner, bassist Peter Hook, and drummer Stephen Morris, the band released their debut album, Unknown Pleasures, in 1979 to critical acclaim. Songs like She's Lost Control and Day of the Lords grappled with themes of alienation and despair, powered by Curtis's haunting baritone and anguished lyrics. But even as Joy Division's star began to rise, Curtis was struggling with personal demons. He suffered from epilepsy and depression, and the rigors of touring exacerbated his condition. In May 1980, on the eve of the band's first North American tour, Curtis died by suicide at age 23. The news sent shockwaves through the music world and left the remaining members reeling. Sumner, Hook, and Morris had already decided that if any member left, they would carry on under a different name. In the wake of Curtis's death, they regrouped as New Order, pioneering a groundbreaking fusion of post-punk and electronic dance music. But Curtis's death forever altered the course of Joy Division's story, leaving fans once again to wonder what might have been had he lived. Stone Temple Pilots.
Well, if I was in a zombie apocalypse, I wouldn't be playing music because that would attract zombies. And I'd have to use my katana sword. But if I was on a desert island and it was one of my albums that I had to choose from, I would choose Tiny Music.
Stone Temple Pilots were one of the most successful rock bands to emerge from the 90s alternative scene. Powered by charismatic frontman Scott Weiland's dynamic vocals and the DeLeo brothers' muscular riffs, they scored hits like Plush, Interstate Love Song, Big Empty, Vaseline, and Sour Girl, while selling over 40 million records worldwide. But Weiland's longtime battle with addiction put the band through the ringer. His drug use led to arrests, canceled tours, and extended hiatuses when he would attempt to get clean. STP first split in 2003 when Weiland left to join Velvet Revolver with several former members of Guns N' Roses. They reunited in 2008, only to break up again in 2013, finally firing Weiland and replacing him with Linkin Park's Chester Bennington. The Bennington era produced a well-received EP, but was short-lived as he amicably departed in 2015 to focus on Linkin Park. Later that year, in December 2015, Weiland was found dead on his tour bus from an accidental drug overdose while on the road with his band, the Wildabouts. He was 48. STP took time to process the loss. While Weiland hadn't been in the band for several years, his distinctive voice was crucial to their biggest hits. The remaining members auditioned new singers to fill the role, wanting someone who could bring fresh energy while still honoring Weiland's legacy. In 2017, STP announced that former X Factor contestant Jeff Gutt had joined as their new lead vocalist. Gutt and the band clicked during his audition, where he impressed the DeLeos and drummer Eric Kretz with his take on Plush. Gutt has since recorded 2 albums with STP, 2018's self-titled Effort and 2020's Perdita. By moving forward with a new singer, rather than folding the band altogether after Weiland's death, STP have managed to enjoy a productive second chapter in their career. Gutt has put his own spin on the classic material while meshing with the band during the songwriting process, and they've made a point to pay tribute to Weiland in concert. The specter of Weiland will always loom large over STP, given the massive impact he had on their original run. His inimitable talents and demons were both integral to the heights of their success and the depths of their struggles. And sadly, his story ended far too soon. But by carrying on, STP can keep his memory alive while still making new music on their own terms. The Cranberries.
You've become a little bit of a sex symbol, Fergal.
Fergal is actually.
No, Dolores, you have really. Fergal already was one, but you've become one now. And I mean, you're kind of a star.
I've always been one. An introvert sex symbol.
The Cranberries were one of the most prominent rock bands to emerge from Ireland in the 1990s. Driven by singer Dolores O'Riordan's powerful and distinctive voice, the group found massive international success with hits like Linger, Dreams, and Zombie. O'Riordan's keening vocals and vulnerable yet raw lyrics made her a compelling frontwoman. She was the band's primary songwriter, penning introspective and politically charged songs that touched on everything from romance to the troubles in Northern Ireland. The combination of O'Riordan's voice and presence with guitarist Noel Hogan's shimmering textures and catchy riffs proved potent. The Cranberries' rise was meteoric. Their 1993 debut album, Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We? And 1994 follow-up, No Need to Argue, sold millions of copies worldwide, making them global stars. O'Riordan's influencing of her Irish heritage and Catholic upbringing into an alternative rock sound gave them a unique style. But the whirlwind of success took a toll. Burnt out from constant touring and pressures, the band went on hiatus in 2003. O'Riordan embarked on a solo career to mixed results. The Cranberries eventually reunited in 2009, steadily touring and releasing new music for the next several years.
Rock. Well, she was still recording music to this day and was recording this week in London when she died in what police are calling an unexplained death.
Then tragedy struck in January 2018. O'Riordan was found unresponsive in the bathtub of her London hotel room and could not be revived. She was 46. An inquest later ruled her death an accidental drowning due to alcohol intoxication, revealing her long battle with mental health and substance abuse. O'Riordan's sudden passing devastated her family, friends, fans, and bandmates. The remaining Cranberries were in the middle of recording a new album, In the End, when she died. After much consideration, they decided to complete the album using demos O'Riordan had already recorded for posthumous release as a tribute to her. However, Hogan and the rhythm section of brothers Mike and Noel Hogan realized that the Cranberries could not continue without O'Riordan's voice and presence. In a statement announcing the band's end, Hogan called O'Riordan the band's heart and soul and an extraordinary talent. Indeed, O'Riordan was irreplaceable. Her vocal style and lyrical point of view defined the Cranberries' sound and gave them a distinct identity among the many alt-rock acts that emerged in the 90s. It's impossible to imagine them existing without her contributions. The decision to disband was undoubtedly difficult, but showed great respect for O'Riordan's legacy and artistic impact. By not attempting to replace her, they ensured the Cranberries' story has a definitive final chapter, and in the end serves as a bittersweet farewell that closes the book on one of Ireland's most successful musical exports. The band's music endures, and O'Riordan's influence continues to surface in new generations of artists. But her tragic death at far too young an age robbed the music world of a singular vocal talent and lyricist. The Cranberries belong to a specific time and place, in large part because of the powerful, unforgettable stamp she left on their body of work, the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
She's thirsty, get her some acid. So she won't have to drink anymore in her life. She never will be thirsty after that. Get her a pint of liquor.
The Jimi Hendrix Experience was a groundbreaking rock band that released just 3 studio albums during Hendrix's lifetime, from 1967 to 1970. But those recordings had a seismic impact, establishing Hendrix as a countercultural icon and the most innovative guitarist of his generation. Formed in London in 1966, the power trio of Hendrix, drummer Mitch Mitchell, and bassist Noel Redding was the perfect vehicle for his unprecedented fusion of blues, rock, psychedelia, and R&B. Are You Experienced, Axis, Bold as Love, and Electric, Ladyland expanded the boundaries of rock and what the electric guitar could do. Hendrix delivered legendary performances at Monterey Pop and Woodstock, cementing his status as rock's reigning guitar god. However, the pressures of fame and touring took a toll. Hendrix split with Redding in 1969, eager to expand his musical vision beyond the limitations of the trio format. He spent much of 1970 recording with a rotating cast of musicians, including Mitchell and bassist Billy Cox. Tragically, Hendrix died in September 1970 at age 27 from complications related to a barbiturate overdose. The suddenness of his death, coming as he was working on a wealth of new material, was a crushing blow. It marked the definitive end of the experience, which could not have continued without the supernova talent at its center. In just a few short years, Hendrix pushed rock forward by light years. No mere guitar hero, he was an artist with an ever-expanding vision of music's future. The fact that so many guitarists still seem to be catching up to his late 60s. Innovations is a testament to his enduring impact. The depth of Hendrix's loss is incalculable, leaving fans to forever wonder what boundaries he would have broken had he lived. The Jimi Hendrix Experience could only have existed with him at the helm, while his tragic death at 27 deprived the world of a generational visionary. The seismic ripples of his short but incredible legacy are still felt strongly to this day. Now it's time to hear from you. What other bands had their legacies cut short by the loss of a key member? Which of these stories resonated with you the most, and why? Let us know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.